Tonight, the unthinkable has happened, and the world will never look at Middle Eastern power dynamics the same way again. In the span of just 18 months, developments occurred that represent the most consequential strategic reversal in modern naval and asymmetric warfare, and every government on Earth is currently scrambling to process what it means while finding no comfortable answer. What happened in the Red Sea and across the Yemeni theater represents a fundamental shift that the Western defense establishment had largely dismissed as impossible. I am going to take you inside every dimension of this moment. How did this small, impoverished, blockaded nation execute a sustained naval blockade that paralyzed global shipping lanes without triggering a decisive Western victory? What does this mean for every carrier strike group, every air defense system, and every alliance that the United States and its partners have spent trillions building? And what does a world transformed by these developments mean for the global order itself? There are no comfortable answers tonight, but the truth, however brutal, is the only thing worth saying. 3 questions will drive everything that follows, and by the end of this analysis, you will understand why the strategic equation has just changed in a way that has no precedent and no established answer. Let me explain what you need to understand first. The country that quietly won this entire war is Yemen. Not through conventional military parity, not through great power backing in the open, but through the relentless application of structural forces, asymmetric incentives, and historical patterns that empires repeatedly fail to recognize until it is too late. While the world fixated on Gaza, Lebanon, and Ukraine, Yemen rewrote the rules of engagement in the Red Sea and in the process delivered the single most decisive underdog victory of the 21st century. Here is what you need to understand about the technical foundation that made this possible. Yemen's Ansar Allah movement, operating under conditions of total blockade and starvation, developed and deployed a family of low-cost, high-impact systems that turned geography into destiny. Their modified Shahed 136 derivatives and indigenous drones cost between $20,000 and $50,000 per unit, equipped with ranges exceeding 2,000 kilometers and payloads sufficient to disable commercial shipping or force multi-million-dollar defensive responses. Their anti-ship ballistic missiles, adapted from Iranian designs but manufactured locally in mountain workshops, achieve speeds of Mach 4 to Mach 6 with circular error probabilities under 100 meters at ranges up to 400 kilometers. Add to this a fleet of uncrewed surface vessels and sea mines laid from small fishing boats, and you have a layered denial capability that no Western admiral anticipated. Contrast this with the economics of the response. A single American SM-2 or SM-6 interceptor costs between $2 million and $4 million. A British Sea Viper missile runs approximately $1.5 million. For every Houthi drone or missile launched, the Western coalition spent between 40 and 200 times more in defensive munitions alone. Over 18 months, conservative estimates place coalition expenditure on defensive intercepts and strike missions above $15 billion, while Yemen's entire campaign, including production and logistics, operated on a budget estimated below $200 million. This is not speculation. It is arithmetic that exposes the structural asymmetry. One side fights with 3D printed components and commercial GPS modules. The other defends with precision-guided weapons designed for peer-state conflicts. Let me explain why these numbers matter beyond mere accounting. They reveal the trap that was quietly set and then sprung. The United States and its allies entered the Red Sea theater expecting a limited policing operation against what they called piracy. They deployed carrier strike groups, advanced destroyers, and F-35 squadrons under the assumption that overwhelming technological superiority would restore freedom of navigation within weeks. Instead, they walked directly into the classic underdog resilience arc that has defined Yemeni history for centuries. Yemen did not need to sink carriers. It only needed to raise the cost of passage until commercial insurers and shipping lines voted with their wallets. And that is precisely what happened. Maersk, Hapag-Lloyd, and MSC rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 12 to 14 days and hundreds of thousands of dollars per voyage. Global supply chains buckled. Insurance premiums for Red Sea transit spiked by 400%. The economic cascade began. Now consider the geographic dimension that turned these technical capabilities into strategic dominance. Yemen's western coastline is a fortress of jagged mountains, narrow wadis, and hidden launch sites carved into terrain that has resisted invaders since the time of the Ottomans. The Zagros-like escarpments of the Yemeni highlands provide natural cover for mobile launchers that can fire and disappear before satellite reconnaissance can respond. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait itself is a choke point only 20 miles wide at its narrowest, easily monitored and contested from elevated positions inland. Add the fact that Yemen controls over 2,000 kilometers of coastline, and you understand why naval superiority alone proved irrelevant. Aircraft carriers cannot patrol every wadi. Destroyers cannot chase every fishing boat. The geography itself became the multiplier. This brings us to the second major question. How did Yemen turn apparent weakness into an unbreakable defensive and offensive posture? The answer lies in the incentive structures that the coalition never fully grasped. Saudi Arabia learned this lesson the hard way between 2015 and 2022, spending more than $100 billion and losing over 10,000 soldiers only to withdraw without achieving any stated objective. The Houthis survived 7 years of relentless bombing, emerged more cohesive, and then extended the same playbook to the Red Sea. When Israel launched its campaign in Gaza, Yemen declared solidarity through action, not rhetoric. Each missile launched at merchant vessels bound for Israeli ports was framed domestically as defense of Palestine, creating unbreakable domestic legitimacy. Every Western strike that followed only reinforced the narrative of resistance against imperialism. The structural incentive was perfect. Yemen could sustain operations indefinitely while the coalition faced mounting political, economic, and military costs at home. Let me take you deeper into the historical pattern recognition that makes this outcome inevitable rather than surprising. Empires have repeatedly failed in this exact theater for the same structural reasons. The Romans never fully subdued the incense kingdoms of southern Arabia. The Ottomans occupied coastal Yemen for centuries but never controlled the highlands. The British established Aden as a crown colony, yet withdrew in humiliation after decades of insurgency. The Soviets avoided direct involvement precisely because they understood the terrain and tribal resilience. Even the United States, after its limited engagements in the 2000s, learned that direct intervention in Yemen produced only blowback. History does not forgive those who ignore its lessons. Yemen is not a failed state. It is a resilient civilizational redoubt that has mastered the art of asymmetric survival. The Houthis simply updated this ancient playbook with 21st century tools. Here is what you need to understand about the trap mechanism itself. Every American and British strike was presented as precision retaliation against specific launch sites. In reality, each strike validated the Houthi narrative, recruited new fighters, and forced the coalition to reveal its capabilities while depleting expensive munition stocks. The United States found itself in the same position Athens faced during the Sicilian expedition, sending its best assets into a theater where the structural advantages all belonged to the defender. The trap was not a conspiracy. It was the logical outcome of mismatched incentives. Yemen fought for survival and identity. The coalition fought for abstract principles of navigation rights, while domestic publics grew weary of endless wars. Game theory predicts exactly this result. The player with the lower cost of continuation always prevails in protracted asymmetric conflict. Now we reach the third major dimension, the broader strategic implications that extend far beyond the Red Sea. This victory has already begun to cascade through the global system. Oil tanker traffic through the strait dropped by more than 60% at peak disruption. European and Asian economies absorbed higher energy costs that exacerbated inflation already strained by other conflicts. More critically, the demonstration effect is profound. If Yemen, with a GDP per capita under $1,000 and a population of 34 million, can impose costs of this magnitude on the world's preeminent naval power, then every literal state with grievances now has a proven template. The petrodollar system, already under pressure, faces new vulnerabilities when choke points can be contested by non-state actors backed by resilient local governance. The United States spent decades building a navy optimized for blue water dominance against peer competitors. It now confronts gray zone denial in the littorals that renders much of that investment strategically marginal. Let me explain the empire decline meta-narrative that frames this moment. Empires fall the same way throughout history, not through a single decisive battle, but through the slow accumulation of asymmetric defeats that expose the gap between projected power and actual sustainable reach. Rome discovered this in Parthia. Britain learned it in Afghanistan and Yemen. The Soviet Union confronted it in the same mountains. Today, the United States faces the identical structural reality. Its military budget exceeds $800 billion annually, yet it cannot guarantee freedom of navigation in a waterway that carries 12% of global trade. This is not a failure of willpower or technology, it is the inevitable consequence of imperial overstretch meeting determined local resistance. Yemen did not defeat the United States Navy in conventional terms. It simply made continued presence prohibitively expensive while preserving its own capacity indefinitely. We now enter the scenario development phase where predictive history becomes actionable foresight. Scenario 1, the most probable pathway based on current structural forces. Yemen consolidates its gains and formalizes a de facto control over Red Sea access through negotiated understandings. The United States and its allies declare victory through semantics, quietly reduce naval presence to avoid further escalation, and accept higher shipping costs as the new normal. Yemen emerges as the undisputed regional power broker in the southern Red Sea, with enhanced legitimacy across the Islamic world. Trade rerouting becomes permanent for a significant percentage of traffic, accelerating the shift of economic gravity toward alternative corridors. Scenario 2, less probable but still plausible if domestic politics in Washington demand action. The coalition attempts a larger-scale operation involving ground elements or intensified bombing. This would trigger the full trap mechanism. Yemen would respond with sustained missile barrages against any amphibious staging, leveraging its mountain redoubts to impose casualties that become politically unsustainable. The economic cascade would accelerate, oil prices potentially reaching $180 to $220 per barrel, fertilizer shortages in Asia, and semiconductor supply disruptions. The result would be accelerated de-dollarization as Gulf states seek alternative security guarantees. America would lose not only in Yemen but in the broader perception of its reliability. Scenario 3, the least likely but most dangerous, direct confrontation involving Iran as an open participant. This would transform the theater into a multi-front regional war where Yemen's role becomes the southern anchor of a unified resistance axis. The structural outcome remains the same, only faster and more costly for the Western side. Game theory is unambiguous here. No rational actor with finite resources continues a conflict where the marginal cost of persistence exceeds the marginal benefit of victory. These scenarios are not speculation. They are logical extensions of the structural forces already in motion. The predictive methodology we have applied throughout this analysis, combining incentive mapping, historical pattern recognition, and quantitative cost-benefit calculation, has consistently pointed to Yemen's quiet victory as the baseline outcome. Let me synthesize what we have covered tonight. Yemen did not win this war through superior technology or foreign legions. It won through superior understanding of the structural battlefield, geography that favors the defender, economics that punish the intervener, domestic legitimacy that sustains indefinite resistance, and historical patterns that empires ignore at their peril. The quiet nature of this victory makes it even more profound. There were no parades in Sana'a announcing the defeat of the coalition. There were no formal surrender documents. There was simply the slow,